In the village of Soup, there lived a woman named Sierra. The young lady spent the whole night developing a new medicine. Sierra's happiness knew no bounds because she finally succeeded. The woman planned to clean up the pharmacy as quickly as possible before the customers arrived. Sierra was often called Mama Hanil. The first customer that day was a grandmother who came to buy medicine for her husband's back pain. Sierra was very talented and was loved and respected by the villagers. The lady always selected medicines for each person individually, and often even made them herself. Thanks to Mom Haniel, Grandma's husband didn't lie in bed all day like he used to, but walked around. People passed on the news that pharmacist Sierra would help everyone. The workday was coming to an end. The lady looked at her watch and realized that it was time to pick up Haniel. The woman was happy to finally be done with the one medication that had caused her so many problems. The lady was also recommended to new clients. The woman considered herself especially lucky that day. She dreamed so much that her new medicine would become popular and she would buy something for her Haniel. Suddenly, the woman heard someone call her name. No one in the village called her by her name, so she looked around in surprise. In front of Sierra stood a man of rather pleasant appearance, but she did not know who he was. The stranger whispered that he was sad. The man's low voice, strong build, and handsome face were captivating. The woman could not believe that she had forgotten such a handsome man. Suddenly, Sierra remembered the man. He was a friend from the academy with whom she had a one-night stand. The lady had been dating this handsome man for a month. Casius looked at the woman with a smile. Lady could not have imagined that after such a long period of time, she would meet her ex. From the look of Sierra, she understood that the young man had become a duke. Lady wondered what he had forgotten in a remote village. For some reason, the duke decided that the lady was raising their child alone. But Sierra had no idea what the man was talking about. She tried to explain to Cassia that it was some kind of misunderstanding. The lady had a bad feeling. Haniel started running towards the woman, calling her mother. When the girl ran up, she hugged Sierra tightly and lovingly. The woman realized that it would be difficult to convince Casius that the girl was not her daughter. Suddenly, it occurred to the man that the child was from some other man. Sierra held her head. The girl asked the lady who the man was standing next to them. The woman waved her hand and said that he was just a stranger. She took the girl's hand and wanted to go home. The man seemed to have his mouth watering. He hadn't expected such a reaction from the woman. He also didn't want anyone to call their relationship so lightly. Sierra believed that she and her husband were not very close, as their affair was only for one night. Although they dated for a month, they then broke up. Casius Idios was the leader of the Academy's fencing club. He was the sole heir to the Duchy of Idios and was destined to become a swordsman. That night the young people met was a coincidence. In the morning, Sierra remembered nothing at all and had no idea how it all happened. But the man kissed the lady passionately. Sierra, having recafgirund, realized that she had spent a night of love with a friend. Seeing the sad lady, Cassius asked her for forgiveness. The young people got drunk and committed an ill-considered act. Sierra knew that her friend would soon be a duke, so she didn't want to get involved in a serious relationship. The lady had to say something, so she pointed out that they shouldn't do that after drinking a little alcohol. It was then that the young man asked the lady to be his girlfriend. That night was the first for both young people. But the confused Sierra did not know what to do. She had no plans for anything like that. The lady understood that if she did not take responsibility for that night, she would be hated for having an intimate relationship with a nobleman. Although Sierra was not happy, she still agreed to be the young man's girlfriend. It was all out of pity. From that moment on, Sierra couldn't even look at alcohol. Looking at the now mature Cassius, she told him that everything was not as he had thought. Meanwhile, the girl, blinking, looked at the young people. As expected, Cassius fell to his knees and admitted that it was his fault. But the woman did not want the man to kneel at all and asked him to stand up. The Duke begged the lady for a chance at forgiveness. The lady wanted to discuss everything later, as there were too many people watching them. Haniel looked intently at the man and called him Dad. Casey smiled gently, sat down, and took the girl by the hand. The child said that she was 5 years old. Despite the fact that the accidental night of love was 6 years ago, and by coincidence, Haniel was 5 years old, The girl also bore a striking resemblance to Sierra. Haniel saw that the atmosphere between the young people was tense, and it occurred to her that Casius was bad. She pushed him away and stepped back. The girl began to accuse Cassius of abandoning her and her mother 5 years ago, while he himself lived a good life. Haniel exclaimed in frustration that she hated her father and asked him to go away. No one expected such behavior from the child, and the woman began to ask Haniel to stop. The situation was difficult because if an ordinary person insulted the Duke, they could even be killed. The lady quickly grabbed the child and suggested that she just go home to rest and sleep. The Duke called the woman over, placing his hand on her shoulder. He asked her not to deny their relationship and their child. Sierra tried to explain to her husband once again that she had never been pregnant, but Casius seemed not to hear her. He promised to protect the lady and their daughter. The girl began to stamp her feet and chase the Duke away, calling him a bad person. The child accused Cassius of abandoning her and her mother and said that he would regret it. The lady asked to be given a week to think about her husband's words. The Duke promised to return in a week and asked the woman not to run away. Sierra and Haniel returned home. The girl happily ran to wash her hands. The sad lady sat down and thought. She had nowhere to run. Although the pharmacy was not in very good condition, it was the woman's property. The most interesting thing was that Haniel was not Sierra's daughter at all. The lady had an older sister, Emil. She was an archmage and had many enemies. The sister entrusted Sierra with the most precious thing, her child, whom she gave birth to from a man unknown to the lady. It has been 5 years since Emil left, cutting off all channels to protect Sierra and Haniel. First of all, the woman wanted to clarify everything with her niece. She gently addressed the girl and reminded her of the conversation in which she had already mentioned that the child had a different mother. Haniel had always grown up with Sierra, so she didn't remember the other woman who gave birth to her and took care of her at first. The girl was worried and said that she loved her mother and that she was the only one she had. Sierra looked at the child with curiosity and asked how she dared to call a stranger her father. The girl thought for a moment. Since she had no father, she decided that Cassius was him. Sierra wanted Haniel to know the truth. She told the child that her mother and father were working far away and would be back soon. Although the last point was a lie. The girl's parents never showed up to check on their daughter, so it was no wonder Haniel thought so. It wasn't the child's fault at all. It was the adult's fault for getting her into such a misunderstanding. Sierra looked at the girl with love and took her in her arms. The woman needed to understand what had happened to Casius and why he had so suddenly decided to find her. Another member of the Abel family lived in the house. The young man was a wolf that his sister had raised in a magical tower. He was like a guardian for Sierra and the girl. That day, the young man brought important letters. One letter was a notice of a rent increase for the pharmacy. The other was a love letter. Abel saw a crowd of men through the window and did not understand what was happening. The lady clarified the situation, explaining that the knights were the retinue of Duke Cassius Idios. Sierra wanted the young man to quickly find out why the men had come. The young man was happy to help, so he went to clarify the situation. After dinner, Sierra and Haniel went to their warm and cozy bed. The girl noticed that her mother looked tired. The child thought that her mother was upset about the letter. The girl quietly got out of bed and went to the door. As soon as she opened it, she tiptoed into the other room to look at the letters. Haniel took one of the letters and read that if the rent was not paid, they would have to vacate the premises as soon as possible. The girl was confused. Haniel was afraid that if she and her mother were kicked out, they would become homeless. The child realized that she needed someone's help. She opened the door and went out into the yard. The knights who were still near the house wondered why the child had come out at such a late hour. She looked at one of the men and asked if he was rich. The boys laughed. One of them said that he was not rich, but noted that His Majesty the Duke was not poor. The child gasped. She shouted that the gentleman was friends with a bad person. The men opened their mouths wide at what they heard, afraid that someone would hear them. Suddenly, His Majesty the Duke appeared before the girl. The knights were afraid that the Lord would be seriously angry because Cassius was known as a ruthless swordsman. In fact, the mad Idios was more terrifying than any beast. The men fell to their knees before the Duke and begged him not to punish the child for her words, since she was still young. The Duke's face changed. He smiled gently and asked the girl what had happened. The child timidly called Casius Daddy. Then she put her hands on her hips and accused him of not taking care of her and her mother. But the child quickly forgot about her accusations. She had one request for her husband. The girl gathered courage and pointed out that if Casius did not help her, he would have problems. The man looked at the child with interest and was ready to listen to everything she so stubbornly demanded. Meanwhile, the knights were shocked at how their duke could be so gentle and polite. For a moment, the child even thought that the duke was afraid of her. She sternly handed the letter to her husband, noting that her mother had suffered from it. Haniel asked Casius to sort out the contents of the letter. His Majesty looked at the girl with love, considering her his own. He promised that he would definitely take care of everything and solve all the problems. After reading the threats of eviction, the Duke could not understand how Lord Beck dared to threaten his beloved with eviction from the estate. Another letter was from a certain Hans. The man proposed to the lady to live together. The Duke was horrified by the conditions in which Sierra and Haniel lived. The man blamed only himself for the fact that the lady had once left him. He had failed to become a man she could trust. From that day on, Casius was ready to protect his beloved from all troubles. He wanted to do everything to keep her by his side. The lady had been feeling a little off yesterday, but after a good night's sleep, she was starting to feel much better. The lady still couldn't understand why Casius was so sure that Haniel was his daughter. The girl herself thought that Sierra was her real mother. But the woman could not let the Duke find out about her sister. She decided that there would be more drama ahead. Suddenly, the lady noticed that the girl's behavior was not as usual. The woman looked closely at the child and asked if she had done something. But Haniel assured her that she was very polite and had done nothing. Suddenly, the girl turned and walked to the other side of the room. The lady shrugged. She was impatiently waiting for information from Abel. It was time to pick up the child for kindergarten. When the woman went outside, she saw the owner of the pharmacy there, who looked quite friendly. Sierra was very worried and fearing that the gentleman had come to demand the rent. Having absolutely no choice, the lady decided to defend herself at all costs. Sierra put her hands on her hips and explained that she couldn't pay that much money, but that's not why the man came. He knelt down in front of the lady and handed her the document. He also apologized. The woman blinked incomprehensibly. She read in the document that she was given free use of the pharmacy until the end of the year. The lady couldn't understand how this was possible. The frightened man was ready to extend the lease for 2 years. He also asked Sierra to pardon him. The lady could not understand anything at all. She wanted to ask the man something, but he got up and ran away. The woman felt incredibly happy for the first time in a long time. She was always polite to customers, but that day there was a special light in her eyes. Suddenly, behind her back, the woman heard talk about Hans, who was very annoying towards her. That man had been annoying like a fly lately. People were whispering that Hans had been arrested. Sierra was glad that luck was on her side that day, but when things were going too well, you couldn't help but expect something pretty bad. It was time to pick up Haniel from kindergarten. The woman noticed that the building had changed, as it didn't look like it usually did. The child told them that a fairy had visited them. Sierra's teacher came up to her and began to thank her profusely. Lady couldn't understand what was happening, because she was usually looked at as a beggar. The teacher was sincerely grateful that Sierra was able to renovate the kindergarten. She even offered to repay her somehow. Behind the lady's back, pathetic gossip began. Someone even called her an unfortunate widow. The lady was indignant that the women were telling lies in front of the child. The governess hastened to inform her that it was not Mrs. Sierra who had done all this herself, but that the valiant knight had enlarged the building on her behalf. The teacher said that the knight came from the family of a Grand Duke who had won the war against the monsters. Sierra finally realized that she was talking about Casius. The lady asked the girl to stand with her teacher for a moment. She went to look for the knights, who were supposed to be somewhere nearby. Sierra nevertheless found the men's hiding place. The men, seeing the woman, began to flee. Sierra cleverly caught one of them and stubbornly asked where His Majesty the Duke was. Meanwhile, Abel, having transformed into a wolf, sensed a scent he had never smelled before. He wanted to report it to Sierra as soon as possible. The knights nevertheless told the lady the location of the duke, and she immediately went there. When the young people met, the husband was surprised by such a sudden meeting. Casius realized that his beloved had been surviving all this time alone, surrounded by cruel people. The woman looked at her husband indignantly and asked if the recent events were his doing. Old Scrooge suddenly said he wouldn't take the rent, Hans ended up in jail, and the kindergarten even called in a witch to renovate. Everything was in turmoil that day. Suddenly, Sierra realized that there were only positives to that day. But she decided to tell her husband that Haniel was not their child and asked the Duke not to feel guilty. The woman assured her husband that she didn't need to do anything for him. She looked at him intently and told him that she had never been pregnant. The girl mistook Sierra for her mother at an early age. The lady looked desperately at the Duke and asked to be left alone. His Majesty did not want to hear anything. He was upset that the woman had to lie because of him. The girl was very similar to Sierra, and the man did not believe the woman's words. Still, Casius wondered who Haniel's mother was then. But the woman could not let the Duke know about her sister's existence. She did not know what to invent. Sierra even agreed to drink the truth serum, which was supposed to be proof that Haniel was not her child. The Duke didn't believe a word the woman said. The man gently took the lady's hand and was ready to do whatever she said. Deep down, the woman knew that Casius had never trusted her, and this made her very sad. Sierra told him everything she could and asked Cassio to come back home, but there was still time before the end of the week. The man apologized and firmly said that he would be late. Meanwhile, Abel returned home. He had some shocking news for the lady about Edius. It turned out that His Majesty had been looking for the woman for over 5 years. It was 5 years ago that Sierra and Haniel settled in the village of Soup, and the lady's sister put up a barrier around the entire village to protect her from Haniel. This way, those who were not related to the village could not enter. Thanks to this, Sierra and Haniel lived in the village without fear of being found. But everything lasted until a certain point. It was rather strange that Casius had begun to look for the lady since his sister had set up the barrier. Abel handed the woman the newspapers, which were full of evidence that His Majesty had been looking for her. The newspapers even had a photo and description of Sierra. It seemed strange that the Duke, because of a one-time affair, would be looking for a woman he had only been seeing for a month for 5 years. The lady thought it made no sense. Abel had heard from gossip that the Edios family was very noble. Casius was the 11th heir, and the man was completely convinced that Haniel was his daughter. The situation was very difficult. The woman could not tell anyone about her sister. That is why she was afraid to drink the truth serum. Abel suggested taking a paternity test. The young man handed the woman a newspaper, which clearly described how a team of doctors in the kingdom had developed a paternity test that contained metals. In just 3 months, the test was able to distinguish noble children from illegitimate ones. It was the only way to prove his innocence of Haniel. But there was one problem. In the countryside, no one accepted orders from ordinary people. The test was most likely used to determine whether a child from a noble family was illegitimate. After all, the doctors of the Hippo Kingdom were professionals. They carefully selected their clients, Idios family, to do a paternity test. But there was another problem, which was connected with the great sorceress. The magic circle that Sierra's sister had set up had expired, and that's why strange people started appearing in the village. The protection that the sorceress had set up lasted only 5 years. The young man was still convinced that the knights of the Idios family would guard their house. Fortunately, the surroundings were still safe, but the woman understood very well that the knights were only hanging around the estate because they had been told about the Duke's daughter. The lady realized that once everything became clear, she would no longer have any protection. Abel had thought about it too. He suggested going to the duchy for a paternity test and clearing up the misunderstanding while they were guaranteed protection. It was much safer than staying at the estate. Knowing the strict commander Duke Idios, he should definitely protect Haniel until he learned the truth. It was the best option, and the lady was going to call her sister as soon as possible. Sierra met with Casius. She had a request for the man, as for a friend. The woman asked permission if she and Haniel could visit his estate. The man looked at the lady with tenderness and unprecedentedly agreed. The man didn't even ask why the lady was going to his estate. Sierra politely told him that she wanted to do a paternity test. Casius had nothing against it. His Majesty looked at the lady with such love that it seemed as if he did not care whether the girl was his child or not. The Duke wanted more than anything else to have his beloved by his side. Sierra laughed and assured her husband that she would not disappear until the test results were known. Casius immediately asked when the lady wanted to go to the estate. Sierra first needed to find a pharmacist to look after the pharmacy while she was gone. She also needed to sort out the accommodation, but the woman wanted to go to the Duke's estate as soon as possible. Casius looked at the lady tenderly and lovingly and asked her to just pack what she needed and not worry about anything. The man assured her that he would take care of the rest. A few hours later, a young lady, who was the top graduate of the pharmacy department, came to work in the woman's pharmacy. The Dragon Knight promised to guard Sierra's house so that bandits wouldn't break into it. The lady was amazed at how seriously the Duke took the task. Very important people were in such a modest place, and the woman could not be happier. Sierra felt happy and safe for the first time in a long time. She and Hanil were about to board the carriage and were ready to set off. Hanil again, because she did not want it. The powerful Duke felt completely helpless at that moment. He wanted so much to show love for his own child, but she ruthlessly pushed him away. For the next 3 months, Sierra's goal was to figure out why the misunderstanding had occurred in the first place and how to resolve it. In addition, the lady intended to continue contacting Abel and wait for her sister to respond. On the way to the Duke's estate, Hanil looked at the nature with curiosity. It was the girl's first time riding in a carriage, and she was surprised that everything moved so quickly. The child had never traveled beyond the village of Soup. It was no wonder that the little lady was so happy, because there were so many interesting things around. Sierra sincerely thanked Casius for such an interesting journey, to use teleportation, but despite all the obstacles, His Majesty kindly prepared a carriage. There were rumors that children had a hard time with teleportation, and the Duke did not want to put the child in danger. Hanil stared out the window for so long that she felt sick. The girl opened her eyes wide, looking around. The child asked to stop the carriage immediately for a second. His Majesty, without hesitation, held a handkerchief in front of the child's mouth. Hanil ruined 2 handkerchiefs, and Sierra regretted not giving the child some medicine for nausea. Sierra watched as the Duke treated Hanil with care, despite her stubborn rejection of him. She could not imagine what would happen when Casius was convinced that the girl was not his child. Soon Hanil fell asleep on the lady's lap. Meanwhile, the Duke reported that suspicious men had been caught near Sierra's house. The lady thought that they were her sister's enemies. As Sierra's sister took on various strange tasks, she had many enemies. For example, there were necromancers who used forbidden magic, a master of the Dark Guild, and various magicians who summoned demons. The woman understood that Casius had come into their lives at the right time and had protected them from Hanil. Otherwise, everything could have ended badly. The Duke's men had skillfully dealt with their enemies. The lady timidly asked if the knights had killed the strangers. His Majesty remained silent. He still did not understand how his beloved and daughter had managed to hide for so long, and who was following them. Casius looked at the lady intently and reassured her that from that day on, he would protect her and Hanil. The lady could not understand why the Duke would say such things in the presence of the child. In her sleep, the girl called out for her father. When the carriage arrived at its destination, the servants were happy to welcome the new guests. The girl was amazed by the beauty of the capital. The woman also looked around with admiration. Suddenly, Hanil felt sad. The Duke had such a luxurious estate, and he had never invited his daughter there. The child almost cried. His Majesty also lowered his eyes in shame. Every time Hanil seemed to mock Casius, the lady felt herself losing control. The butler approached the new guests. He invited the young ladies to go to their rooms. Sierra noticed that Casius had really changed. He began to look like a real nobleman. When the butler showed the child her room, she clutched her head in surprise. The girl had never seen such a spacious and elegant room before. It was filled with various toys and decorations. A few minutes later, the butler led the lady to a room that was planted with various plants. The room was filled with a huge number of herbs from all over the world, and she was very impressed. Sierra never imagined that her dream could come true. Casius said that he had collected seeds and some plants, but he was convinced that they still weren't enough. Sierra looked at her husband in a completely different way. She thanked him with all her heart. The Duke had already lost a woman once and didn't want it to happen again. The lady guessed that Casius had done good things only because of a misunderstanding, and that it was wrong. She was sad that a good man felt guilty for no reason. The maids opened the morning newspaper. All the news was about the Duke. The people noticed that something had changed on the estate. The emptiness behind the house had turned into a golden garden. People wondered what had happened to the workaholic Duke. The newspaper reported that His Majesty had hired a large number of secret agents and had personally contacted the capital's pharmacists and apothecaries. It was the first time the maids had seen the Duke so happy and smiling. That day, he was incredibly kind and caring, as never before. The servants believed that the guest who had arrived was the one they had been gossiping about for a long time. The maids thought that she was the Duke's first love. His Majesty made a huge contribution to the victory in the war, and was presented to the princess, but he did not want to marry anyone but Sierra. The maids had previously thought that Lady Macbeth was the man's first love, but it turned out that it was not so. The women decided that it was better to be friendly and polite with Miss Sierra, since she was chosen by Casius himself. The Duke used to be gloomy all day long, but after he met Sierra, after a long separation, everything changed. No one wanted the cloudy days to return. The Duke ordered a paternity test, which he informed the lady about. The woman assured her husband that even if he turned out not to be Haniel's biological father, she wanted everything proven in writing. Casius handed Sierra a contract that was sealed with magic. The woman had to swear an oath and stamp her finger on it. The man explained that if they confirmed it, the contract would be signed. The woman was convinced that His Majesty would not lie to her. She was in no position to ask for treaties. The lady caught her husband's loving gaze on her. Every time she got the impression that Casius had gone looking for her only because he loved her. Although the woman was still sure that Casius's feelings for her had long since faded, she convinced herself that she shouldn't think about unnecessary things. It was necessary to find out why the misunderstanding had arisen. The man continued to stare at the lady. After the young people separated, Sierra went to the village. Something must have happened that made the man think that the lady had become pregnant by him. The woman wanted to know what had happened to Casius after she had left him. Meanwhile, the man's thoughts were only about the lady. He did not want to let her go, ever. Casius smiled gently and asked for cooperation for the next 3 months. He really wanted the lady to fall in love with him again. After a serious conversation, the woman went to her room. She lay down on the luxurious bed and felt happier than usual. Sierra felt comfortable, having been fed, allowed to sleep, and even having various herbs planted for her. Suddenly, the lady quickly stood up and scolded herself for her thoughts. Sierra found herself thinking that she couldn't get used to living in the Duke's estate. Recent events had definitely made her happier, and she felt her husband's concern. Haniel ran up to the lady and started poking her finger into her stomach. The woman pretended to be in pain and started to sob. The child was very scared that she had hurt her mother. Sierra and Haniel lay relaxed on the bed. Lady noticed that the girl looked happy. There were many toys and soft dolls around. The child really liked the estate, and this was not surprising at all. The woman understood that they would have to leave the luxurious residence in 3 months. Life in the Duke's estate was completely different from what the woman and the girl had known before. Sierra knew she could handle the longing, but she worried about Haniel, who probably wouldn't want to leave her new home. Who probably wouldn't. The child decided to tell Sierra a secret. She whispered that the toys her uncle had given her were good, but it was still more fun to play with her mother. Sierra gently hugged the child and held her close. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. Lexelle, who worked as a senior maid, came in. Sierra asked to be called by her first name without formalities, but the servant could not speak to the respectable lady as if she were a friend. The maid knew very well that the woman had received the recognition of the Duke himself, so it was necessary to behave with dignity. Lexelle informed Sierra that Madame was looking for her. The lady obediently walked with the servant into Madame's room. The woman felt a little uneasy as she did not know what conversation would await her. but could only guess. Lady was the wife of the late Marquis of Miles. She was better known as the Great Lady. She was also the sister of the late Duke of Idios and the head mistress of the Idios estate. Despite the fact that the lady had no blood relationship with her nephew, she adored Duke Casius, and he entrusted her with the management of the residence. The woman devoted herself entirely to the Idios family. The Great Lady was a typical aristocrat and a cold stepmother. She was a lady who had made a name for herself among the people. It was impossible for someone with such high standards to like an ordinary person. Sierra's palms were sweaty. She feared the lady's negative reaction to her arrival. The maid left the women and went out. Sierra had first met the lady 5 years ago, when she was still the Marchioness of Miles. The lady had only seen the Marquise once, but she seemed kind to her. Then the woman even gave Sierra a large sum of money to break up with Casius. The lady was ashamed that she had returned after 5 years, especially after taking the money. The woman never thought that Casius would go so far for her. There was food on the table. Madame offered the lady a treat. It was a snack that Sierra often ate at the academy. It was so often that she vomited. The woman thought that Madame would scold her for going back to Casius. But to Sierra's great surprise, the lady said that she had once done a terrible thing to her. Sierra felt ashamed and apologized for accepting the money, and the time came when she appeared again on the doorstep of that house. Madame noticed that Sierra had not changed at all. The woman remembered the moment when she had so ruthlessly given the girl money and broke off Cassia's relationship with her. Previously, Madame thought that she had done nothing serious by throwing the lady out, but she realized that she had thrown the pregnant Sierra to the side of life. And it was this decision that separated the young people. Madame blamed herself for 5 whole years. Arrogance ruined Cassius' life, and darkness descended on their family. Madame gently touched Sierra's hands, as if she felt sorry for her. The lady understood that it was very difficult for a young girl to be with a child all this time. Madame assured Sierra that their relationship would reach a new level and there would be no more misunderstandings between them. Sierra lived happily all those years and was very glad that Madame had given her the money. But Madame decided that the lady had said such words only to make her feel less guilty. She was ashamed that she had pushed away a defenseless child. Sierra realized that she was really getting into it. She noticed that the people around her began to appreciate her very much and didn't listen to the talk about Haniel not being her and Cassia's child. Sierra wanted to lock herself in her room out of shame and stay there as long as possible so that no one could worry about her. Meanwhile, the acting Marchioness of Miles, Adante Miles, was reading the newspaper. The news described how Duke Idios had suddenly bought all kinds of toys. Suddenly, the Marquis was asked by the servants what His Majesty's purpose was. They said that the Great Lady had promised to help Sierra in everything. Adante could not believe it. The Great Lady never helped Adante, her stepdaughter, and it was impossible for her to show kindness and care to any ordinary person. Adante's stepmother was the epitome of aristocracy. The only person she adored was her nephew, Casius Idios, who looked exactly like her. The maid told the Marquise that Sierra and Casius were rumored to have had a child together. Adante didn't like this, as she and the Idios had been related by marriage for generations. The Idios family by any means. Not long ago, the Idios and Miles families joined forces to send trading ships to the eastern continent. It was a powerful business aimed at aristocrats. The Miles family had even gone into debt, investing millions. Lady couldn't let some scandal ruin everything. The woman wanted to look into Sierra's eyes. The lady couldn't understand why Cassius was doing everything on such a grand scale. She thought she should have thought about it when she hired a dragon knight to guard her estate. Life in the apartment was fantastic. A comfortable soft bed, wonderful luxuries, and lazing around all day was everyone's dream. Sierra knew that in 3 months she would have to leave that estate. The woman looked at the girl tenderly and asked where she would like to live in 3 months, in the village of Soup, or in the capital. Haniel didn't care where she lived, as long as she and her mother were happy and comfortable. The lady was amazed. Sierra was sorry that her poor sister was missing such a beautiful time in the girl's life. The lady could not understand why there had been no letter from Abel or her sister. The maid entered the room and announced that His Majesty the Duke had sent a letter. It said that at 6 o'clock, He had planned to go to a fancy restaurant and ask the lady to get ready. Casius assured that it was there that he would write an application to the kingdom of Hippo for a paternity test. The lady had rejected all of the Duke's invitations, and he decided to use the application for the test as bait so that the lady could not refuse. Sierra asked the senior maid to help her get ready to leave. The woman mentioned that she and the Dukes were going to a restaurant that evening. The maid swore on her honor that she would do her best. She immediately began to prepare. Finally, after long hours of preparation, the lady was ready. When Sierra looked in the mirror, she was amazed at how beautiful she had become. Also, the lady had never worn dresses like that before. She felt like a princess. There was still a lot of time before the expected hour, and the maid suggested that the lady take a walk. The servant really wanted the Duke to see the beauty, Sierra, as soon as possible. The maid had seemingly accidentally led the lady to the Duke's fencing practice area. But it was no accident at all. The lady shrugged her shoulders and decided to wait a bit, and then go to the restaurant with Casius. When the man saw his beloved in such a beautiful form, he was almost speechless. His Majesty quickly put his sword down and approached the lady. The woman assured the man that he was a skilled swordsman. A friendly conversation ensued between the young people. The woman noticed that the Duke was flirting with her in every possible way, and openly. The young people politely talked about fencing, but the man managed to compliment the lady. The Duke remarked that Sierra was beyond compare that day. Every day he wanted to tell the lady how sweet and charming she was. The woman was going to make a final decision. She didn't want to be led by her husband's fine words. When the young people approached the restaurant, Sierra was almost speechless. The lady, of course, guessed that the atmosphere would be wonderful, but she did not expect this at all. There were lilies everywhere. They were the woman's favorite flowers, and she was delighted. The atmosphere was so beautiful and enchanting that a smile never left Sierra's lips. Casius, like a true gentleman, presented Caria with a bouquet of flowers. The lady awkwardly accepted such a delicate and noteworthy gift. She quietly thanked him, but at the same time she was upset because she had not prepared anything in return. Suddenly, it occurred to the woman that the Duke still liked her. His loving gaze screamed it. The Duke thoughtfully pulled out a chair and invited his beloved to sit down. Casius was always a considerate man, and that day he was especially so. The man was truly convinced that Sierra was the mother of his child, and in the lady's opinion, that was why he was behaving as he did. Of course, reality was not a love story. Cassius Idios, who could have dated anyone, chose Sierra. Lady couldn't believe it, because the situation seemed impossible. The waiters served delicious snacks. The Duke started talking about a paternity test. The man said that there were 2 ways to take this test. The first was to call a doctor, as the lady had said. Another way was to go to the Hippo Kingdom in person. Cassius really wanted to spend those 3 months with Sierra there together. The woman barely managed to avoid the Duke, but instead he proposed a trip together, and a 3-month one at that. His Majesty assured her that everything was fine and suggested that the lady do as she saw fit. Such statements made her feel guilty. Nevertheless, the lady gathered courage and expressed her opinion, which was that she wanted to invite a doctor to the estate, and signed it. The waiter poured the young people a tart wine. The drink turned out to be delicious. Previously, the lady could not afford it, but from that moment, she already knew what good wine was. Time flew by quickly. The Duke rose and approached the lady. Just looking at his beloved made the man lose patience. He wanted more than just a meeting in a restaurant. The lady was frightened because the man was too close to her. The Duke recalled how long ago a woman had allowed herself to be kissed, and even more. But everything had changed, and Sierra stubbornly said that she would not allow it. The Duke, not knowing the whole truth, continued to refer to the past. He was ready to do anything to make his beloved forgive him and love him again. Sierra quickly downed at the glass of wine and mentally asked herself to calm down. She was convinced that a love story between an aristocrat and an ordinary woman could not exist. She did not believe that such a thing could happen. The lady's life was too hard for her to believe in such fairy tales. The only things she could believe in were ability, effort, and wealth. Sierra knew for sure that as soon as the paternity test was passed, she and her husband would part like ships at sea. Casius, who had no idea what the lady was thinking, admired her. Despite everything, life in the Duke's estate was happy and peaceful. The woman wanted to stay there forever, especially since Haniel was not deprived of anything. Although the lady liked her new temporary life, she tried to push all unnecessary thoughts away. For some reason, the woman felt that she would not be let go so easily afterwards. While Sierra and Haniel were having a peaceful breakfast, the Marquise burst into the cafe. The woman assured them right from the doorway that it was not easy to meet the lady. The servant bowed to the Marquise, and she told him that Mrs. Sierra was a guest of the Duchy of Idios. But the angry woman ordered them to be silent. She asked indignantly how long it had been since ordinary servants had given advice. The Marquise began to humiliate Sierra in every way. Nevertheless, the servant dared to threaten the lady, noting that if the Duchess found out about her antics, there would be trouble. Sierra finally realized that she was standing before the Duchess's daughter-in-law, the Marchioness Andante Miles. The lady seemed to sense that something similar was about to happen. Worried, Sierra asked the maid to take Haniel out as soon as possible. She didn't want the child to hear the fighting and insults. The Marquise was served tea and offered a treat. The woman had already heard from gossip that Sierra lived on the estate as a dependent. The lady confirmed this fact. The haughty Marquise remarked that sitting at the same table with an ordinary person spoiled her mood. Sierra instantly wanted to get up and leave. The woman literally ran into the unfortunate lady with some kind of claim. Andante wanted to show the lady who was in charge. She asked in confusion why such a simple woman was visiting the duchy. It occurred to the Marquise that Sierra had boldly thrown dust in her mother's eyes and was trying to disgrace their family. From the aristocrat's point of view, Sierra was indeed a low-ranking commoner. The lady understood that although it was indeed a misunderstanding, she had still deceived the Duchess and tarnished the honor of the duchy. Sierra fully shared the Marquise's accusations and, without concealing, pointed out that Andante was right. Suddenly, the Marquise stood up and began shouting to the lady to get out of the duchy as quickly as possible. Sierra lowered her head and replied that she would certainly obey. Sierra asked the Marquise to be calm and told her that in 3 months she would leave the duchy. As she had planned. Andante noticed that the lady's pronunciation was impeccable. She was not surprised that the woman had charmed the Duke and Duchess of Idios. The Marquise saw in Sierra no ordinary woman. Her skills were truly brutal. On the other hand, the lady understood that the Marquise was going to put her in her place with just a set of facts. Sierra watched silently as the Marquise nervously gripped her glass. It even seemed to her that the woman was about to spill water on her. The lady closed her eyes and was ready for anything. Suddenly, Haniel ran into the cafe. The girl put her hands on her hips and loudly ordered the lady not to touch her mother. The child began to scream loudly that the evil woman was going to pour water on her mother. Gossiping began behind the women's backs. The Duchess came to the cafe, who was completely dissatisfied with Andante's behavior. Madame pointed out that Sierra was a valued guest of the duchy. Suddenly, Sierra sided with the Marquise, assuring her that she was not guilty of anything. The Duchess asked why Sierra had suffered such humiliation. She considered the lady too kind and gentle and did not understand why Sierra defended Andante. A worried Sierra reported that the Marquise was merely stating facts. The Duchess asked if Andante looked down on the lady because she was of low status. Sierra noted that the Marquise was not arrogant towards her, but simply called a spade a spade. The Duke himself also visited the cafe because Haniel complained that someone was humiliating Sierra. Casius had come specifically to clarify the situation. The Duke decided it was time to make an official statement. He gently took Sierra's hand and pulled her close. Raising his head, the Duke proudly declared that if anyone even laid a finger on Sierra, they would have to deal not only with the Duke personally, but also with the entire Idios family. When the noise had died down, the Duchess decided to have a cup of tea. Sierra had gone out for the first time in a long time, and she had been insulted. The woman understood that her relationship with Casius was only just beginning to improve. The Duchess was very frightened when Haniel suddenly ran into the room and told her that the evil aunt had been torturing her mother. The woman decided to invite Sierra and Haniel to tea. Madame blamed herself for letting them go to the cafe. Madame ordered the maid to buy everything from stores within a kilometer of the duchy. The Duchess wanted to create a safer atmosphere for Sierra to enter the world. As the lady was walking around the estate, she noticed a stack of newspapers. Taking the top one, Sierra began to read its contents. When she opened the newspaper, she saw her photo there. The lady read stories about herself in the newspaper. She was very sad. Usually, the estate was open for communication and interaction with other aristocrats. There was information in the newspaper that the estate was going to be closed to visitors. The lady thought it was unfair because she guessed that it was because of her. The lady could understand Casius, but she couldn't understand why the Duchess would do that. Sierra didn't even have the thought of deceiving anyone. The woman decided to record evidence of her innocence on video, audio, and in recordings. First, they needed to be collected. Meanwhile, the maid asked what exactly the lady would like to eat. Sierra chose the omelet she had eaten last time. When the woman was left alone, she was lost in thought. Casius and the Duchess were too kind to the woman, and it made her nervous. On the other hand, life in the duchy was very comfortable. Deep down, Sierra knew she didn't want to go back home. She desperately wanted her sister to come and get her out of this mess as soon as possible. The events took place in the magic tower. Abel intended to meet the Archmage that day. Suddenly, the young man saw the Archmage's wife with a bottle of wine in her hands. She didn't seem very happy to see the young man. Abel immediately asked if the lady had been there the whole time. He didn't understand why the woman hadn't gotten in touch. Abel asked the lady to hurry to Sierra, explaining that Haniel was mistaken for her daughter. The young man understood that the lady was enjoying her freedom, but he said that Haniel must be found. The woman knew well that Casius Idios, a monster of the Idios clan, was obsessed with Sierra and considered Haniel his daughter, and Sierra could not find a place for herself because of this. The young man couldn't understand how Amil knew about this. The woman just smiled and said that when a person reached the level of Archmach, all the wisdom of the world was revealed to him. She also called Abel her cute puppy. Abel realized that Emil wasn't just having fun carrying out strange orders. The Archmage explained that otherwise she wouldn't be able to prove that Haniel wasn't Sierra's daughter. At that time, the woman was banned from leaving the capital due to a conflict with the authorities. Suddenly, the young man noticed bread on the woman's table, which could only be bought in the capital. He thought about it. The Archmage explained that she wouldn't be able to go anyway, because if she intervened, Sierra and Haniel would be in danger. Ami asked to be given to her sister Sierra to stay in the Duchy of Idios for the next 3 months, as Casius Idios would look after her better than anyone else. The Archmage also asked to convey to her sister what she wanted to hear most of all: the information that she could use her powers without restrictions, because she had been doing well and following instructions all this time. The lady was about to leave, saying that the next meeting would be in 3 months. Abel couldn't believe that Emil could just leave, but the lady silently jumped down. Abel noticed a parcel on the table. When he opened it, he read that Sierra was in danger. The young man's heart skipped a beat. Without wasting time, the young man arrived at the duchy. He informed the guards that he had come to see Lady Sierra. The young man also gave his name. The guards looked at each other because they really had orders to let in anyone who was even remotely connected to Miss Sierra. Suddenly, Haniel saw Abel and started running towards him as fast as she could. The child threw herself into the young man's arms. She felt very happy. The girl ordered the knights to let Abel in. The Duke appeared at the gate and inquired about the young man's identity. Abel smiled politely and introduced himself. It occurred to him that the well-dressed man in front of him was the same Duke Idios. Abel said that he had previously lived with Lady Sierra. The Duke looked at the young man with incomprehension. The young man noticed that Duke Casius Idios was even more handsome than the gossip painted him. The young man's face immediately changed, and he became sad. The Duke was friendly with his sister Sierra and Haniel, and he did not understand why the Duke hated only him. His Majesty looked very serious and had no intention of letting any stranger near his beloved. Casius suggested that Abel tell him everything he needed, and then he would pass everything on to Sierra. Abel had no intention of telling the Duke anything, as it was a secret between him and his sister. The young man revealed that Sierra was his sister and insisted on meeting her. Watching the child grab the young man, The Duke had no choice but to lead him inside. His Majesty was concerned that Sierra would be angry if he did not allow his meeting with Abel to take place. When the men were left alone in the room, the Duke asked the young man how long he and Sierra had lived together. The young man said that it had been since they moved to the village of Soup. The Duke became curious about how his beloved lived and whether there were many obstacles in her path. Abel said that the lady often had ill wishers, and there were also many people who reproached her for raising a child at such an age. Abel also said that no matter what, the woman always looked happy. Suddenly, the young man wondered why the Duke needed to know how hard life was for Sierra. Sierra often felt discouraged, raising a child on her own. She also often encountered strange men. Abel didn't even want to remember the past. Something inside Casius seemed to have turned upside down. He began to blame himself even more for not taking care of his beloved. Abel also said that many customers were dissatisfied with the pharmacy. Sierra tried to live happily and ignore the difficulties. But in reality, if the pharmacy were to close, it would actually turn into a huge disaster. Although no one thought about it, the lady was very happy to meet Abel. She wanted to hear news from her sister, but the young man upset the woman, noting that Emil would not be able to come in person, so she asked to stay in the duchy. Sierra listened to the news with a frown. She couldn't understand what her sister was thinking. Lady had taken custody of the child 5 years ago. The woman was furious because Hanil's mother had never come to visit her daughter in all that time. Abel tried to calm the seriously angry lady. He said that he had brought a letter and a scroll from Emil. The young man said that the scroll could be used if something threatened Hanil's life. If the scroll is used, then the Archmage Emil was due to appear. Sierra had built up a lot of anger towards her sister over the years. While the lady had been following her instructions for a long time, Emil had forgotten how hot-tempered her sister was. With Sierra and Hanil in danger, the lady felt it was time to kill her sister. Abel asked the woman not to summon the Archmage, as the scroll was supposed to activate automatically if Hanil was in trouble. Abel began to shout that if the lady tore the scroll, she would ruin it. Sierra felt broken and sad. She realized that she would still have to live in the duchy for 3 months. Abel revealed that the Archmage allowed Sierra to use her powers. When Sierra was at the academy, she could have taken first place and received a scholarship, but she had to give it up. The woman was happy that she would finally be able to use her skills. This was great news. The lady suggested that Abel take a walk, noting that there was an incredible park nearby. A subordinate arrived at the Duke, bringing the results of the investigation. The man said that Abel was a puppy. A beast man. There was no exact data, but the servant was convinced that he and the lady had indeed spent a long time together. According to the villagers, Abel was very loyal to Sierra, as she fed him and gave him blood. There were still many unknowns, so the man noted that the case needed further investigation. Casius realized that the young man had been protecting Sierra and Hanil while he was away. The Duke decided that he had no right to be jealous of his beloved Abel. Hanil entered the Duke's room. The girl wanted to ask something. Hanil sat down next to the Duke, who offered her a cup of tea. According to the maids, Hanil looked very much like His Majesty. The husband, hearing these words, smiled. The child looked at the Duke tenderly and asked if he would always be kind to her mother. Hanil whispered that from the maid's words, the Duke could be relied on. The man was very happy with the girl's words. He was ready to devote his whole life to her and Sierra. The child, almost crying, asked why the man had left her mother. Casius lowered his eyes and noted that he had not abandoned her. The Duke explained that certain circumstances had arisen, and he had misunderstood everything. The girl frowned and accused her husband of abandoning her mother. At that moment, Hanil and Abel came to the Duke's office. The lady scolded the girl for her bad manners and asked her to be polite. Sierra apologized to her husband for Hanil's behavior. The Duke immediately stood up and said that everything was fine. The lady was worried that the girl would become attached to Casius, and then she would be hurt. When everyone was fully assembled, the doctors from the Hippo Kingdom were teleporting with the help of a magic scroll. Leon, Kilo, and Mr. Hentel arrived at the duchy. Since the doctors had arrived at the Duke's estate at an official invitation, it was necessary to behave in a dignified manner regardless of the circumstances. The women were proud of the wonderful opportunity to conduct a paternity test on the Duke's own estate. The doctors were eager to get acquainted with the medical technology of the empire as soon as possible. In general, there were very few competent doctors in the world. They could be counted on the fingers of one hand, so the duchy had a wonderful opportunity to meet the best. Lanya and Kilo had looked at Lady Sierra with pity since they first met. They thought the woman was a commoner undergoing a paternity test. It was a typical story. Lianya understood that all that was left for Sierra to do was to request a paternity test. Lianya was very sad that the Duke was so heartless towards the one he called his first love. Mr. Hentel was going to explain the procedure for conducting the test. It consisted of 3 stages. First, it was necessary to familiarize yourself with the instructions that the man handed out to the young people. The first step was to check for magical radiation. This was based on the fact that relatives usually had similar magical radiation. Sierra couldn't understand how the doctors were going to test for it using a potion. The second stage was to check the signs. The third stage was to be conducted confidentially. His method could only be revealed after the second stage was completed. If the conclusion of a stage was a match, the transition to the next one was made. If there was a mismatch, the relationship was not confirmed. Sierra was convinced that it would all take 3 months, but she realized that she would be free in 1. The young people studied the instructions and agreed to begin the test. The lady had one question. She wanted to know if the leaves of the mullein tree would be used in the magical radiation test. The young leaves of the mullein tree were considered herbs that increased magical power. The herbs also had another hidden ability. If you crushed the leaves of the mullein and applied them to your fingertips, the person's magic wave would manifest as a magic circle, and Sierra knew all about it. Mr. Hentel looked at the young people in surprise and said that this was not the time to worry. He also said that the instructions did not say which leaves to use. Since Sierra had studied medicine and pharmacy at the academy, she knew a lot about herbs. Mr. Hentel was still surprised to report that the lady was right. Sierra also added that in addition to those herbs, olives and kalania roots would also be used. She asked if she had made a mistake. The doctors literally stared at the lady. They had never been asked anything like that before. Lianya and Kilo were amazed by the woman's knowledge. They wanted to know where the lady got such information from, since they had not told her anything. Sierra smiled and said that her specialization was also pharmaceuticals. The Duke was impressed by his lover's knowledge. He coughed loudly and wondered how the test would be conducted. Kilo decided that in any case, Duke Edios, better known as the Ghost of the Battlefield, was most likely the first to insist on a paternity test. Mrs. Kilo thought that Sierra did not look like someone who would lie. As a woman, Kilo felt sincere sympathy for the lady. She looked at her and noted that in the future, she needed to take the utmost care of her health. Sierra was surprised because her health was in perfect order. The Duke straightened his shoulders and asked to leave the care of the lady's health to him. He asked if there was anything else important. Kilo felt that His Majesty had treated her and the team's visit with disrespect. The elite press had spoken of the Idios family's outstanding hospitality, which had not been fully realized. Mr. Hentel noted that he had no further instructions. He and his team were going to start preparing the potion immediately. It was late evening. Lying in bed, Sierra wondered how best to explain everything to Haniel. The girl was quite intelligent. Since everyone in the estate was discussing the paternity test, the woman understood that the girl would understand everything one day. Suddenly, Haniel looked at Sierra and asked what she loved most. The lady replied that it was money. The woman also added that she enjoyed healing patients. Sierra noticed that Haniel was becoming attached to the Idios estate, and even to Casius. The woman understood that it was time to resume the delayed education. Lady looked at the child and reminded her that she had another mother. But Haniel didn't even want to hear anything. She hugged Sierra, noting that she had no one but her. The woman understood the girl's position, because she was the only one who was close to her. Amil had never visited her own child, so this played a significant role in the child's understanding of who her mother was. Although Sierra always mentally scolded her sister for being irresponsible, something strange was happening. Lady couldn't understand why Amil just couldn't pick up and come. It occurred to Lady that perhaps her sister really had some serious problems. But whatever the reason, it was hard to share her ruthless act with her. When Sierra was young, her sister once teleported from the northern part of the continent using a sous-vide. Teleporting over long distances was a risky magic that could cause a reverse flow of magical power. But Emil came anyway, so that Sierra wouldn't be sad. There came a time when her sister stopped visiting, even after pleading. The woman decided that there must have been some circumstance that specifically prevented the Archmage from coming. Haniel tightly and intended to have another serious talk with her the next day. The lady kept wondering why her sister hadn't come to visit her. Meanwhile, the princess threw a ball at her estate. Her friends and lady acquaintances were grateful for the invitation. Gossip immediately broke out among the women about the commoner who had appeared in the duchy. There were rumors that Sierra was actually the duchess's illegitimate child. There were also rumors that the woman had a child by His Majesty the Duke. The princess wondered who Duke Idios would stay with, Lady Macbeth or Her Majesty. There had been gossip earlier that Lady Macbeth had been the Duke's first love. Suddenly, a handsome man appeared in the banquet hall. No one knew who he was. It was assumed that a prince from another country had visited them, who was also a distant relative of the imperial family. The prince approached a lady and introduced himself as being from the southern region of Thompson. He asked the woman to dance. Later, Prince Isel retired to Princess Elena. The princess wondered if the prince knew about the gossip that was going on in society. The man knew many different stories about the woman who had become part of the Idios clan. The man wondered whether his goal regarding the Idios would be realized. At the same time, the princess asked what measures the prince would take in case of failure. Isel assured him that everything would go smoothly. The man's opponent was Duke Idios. Also, His Majesty was never wrong, so he was completely and utterly confident in himself. The prince reminded Elena not to forget her words, as she had promised a high reward. The princess asked her not to worry and assured her that she would do everything as agreed. Meanwhile, Sierra was lying in bed, doing nothing. She was reading an interesting book. Lady initially thought the test would be done right away, but it had been a week since then. The lady was living her best life. She didn't worry about rent, and her bed was very soft. She had a life where every whim was fulfilled, was satisfied with one bell. Sierra was wondering if she would be able to leave in a month. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. The maid brought the woman a gift from the Duchess. When the lady looked out the door, her surprise knew no bounds. The woman saw a crowd of people and looked awkwardly at the servant. Since Sierra loved to treat patients, the Duchess decided to invite people to her estate. A smile appeared on Sierra's lips as she finally had the opportunity to use her abilities. The woman remembered the Duke's words that the merchants had arrived, and he had replenished the warehouse's supplies. The lady immediately rushed to the herbs that the Duke had kindly given her. The woman began to examine the jars, for there were many of them. Sierra hurried to mix the herbs that she considered necessary. In the village of Soup, a woman pretended to be an ordinary pharmacist, but finally, her sister allowed her to use her abilities to the fullest. She had to hurry because the patients were waiting. Hentel visited Sierra. The doctor asked what kind of liquid the lady was holding in her hands. The woman smiled and told him that she had prepared a potion. Mr. Hentel was just about to prepare for a pharmaceutical symposium. The man wondered if the woman had really prepared the medicine herself. The lady didn't see anything strange, because she had prepared only a common painkiller. It was the first time the gentleman had seen a potion for such a purpose in such a color. Sierra assured him, with a smile, that she had developed this method herself. The man felt pure magical energy. He wondered if the lady was a magical pharmacist. Sierra's design impressed the gentleman quite a bit. Apothecaries were divided into magical and ordinary. Ordinary apothecaries made medicines only from herbs, while magical apothecaries used energy to create potions. A magical apothecary's abilities depended on the purity of his mana. As a relative of the Archmage, Sierra had no equal in this. She smiled and said that it was her talent. Mr. Hentel asked for some medicine for his headache. The woman was upset because the medicine was the best of the samples she was going to patent. Sierra planned to sell it to merchants at a high price and donate the money to charity, enhancing her reputation. In any case, the doctor did not look like a thief. The lady decided that if he asked for the medicine, He would not be able to repeat it in the same quantity later. Sierra promised to give the sample to her husband only in the evening, but she had one condition. Sierra didn't want the ingredients of her recipe to be revealed. She planned to sign a legal contract that would apply throughout the empire. The woman allowed the man to use her remedy in the future. The doctor was pleased and nodded silently. The lady had patients waiting for her, so she hurried to them. Mr. Hentel considered Sierra a weak and fragile woman, but she turned out to be the one the doctor had been looking for all this time. One of the grandmothers was the first to test the medicine, and a miracle happened. The pain went away in a matter of minutes. Sierra was pleased. A sense of self-sufficiency came to her, which grew. The old woman told her that if you walk along the alleys of the estate, you can see rare herbs there. The woman was delighted and promised to walk around and look at the plants. The lady also assured the old woman that she could come at any time. That day, Sierra received many patients who were sincerely grateful to her. Before evening, the woman wanted to take a walk around the estate. Although Sierra was a commoner, thanks to her sister, she was able to gain diverse experiences. When Sierra showed her abilities in medicine, Emile took her with her many times to the botanical garden with rare plants. The woman missed her sister so much that she had not seen her for 5 years. While thinking, Sierra tripped over a pebble and fell. The woman felt ashamed, but she was glad that no one was around. The lady thought she had twisted her leg. The sad lady sat down on a bench to rest. It was getting colder and darker outside. At first, the woman thought the fact that no one was around was encouraging, but she couldn't figure out how to get home. Fortunately, the Duke was soon nearby. The woman had long noticed that every time Casius looked at her, he looked happy, and she began to think of something. The Duke wondered in surprise why the lady was sitting all alone. Meanwhile, Sierra was lost in her thoughts. It seemed to her more and more that the man liked her after all. Sierra felt in her heart that the Duke didn't just like her as the woman who had borne him a child. She lowered her head and sadly announced that she had fallen and hurt her leg. The man decided to see what the problem was. When he began to examine the woman's leg, she became embarrassed. Sierra also began to hiccup, and His Majesty asked for a little patience. The man was going to bandage the lady's leg. He said that he had learned to bandage on the battlefield. From the stories, Sierra had already heard that Casius had experienced terrible suffering on the battlefield and had barely returned from there, having defeated all the monsters. The lady decided that these were not the memories the man would want to stir up. But he smiled and said that thanks to this, he was able to bandage the woman's leg. Sierra looked at Cassio tenderly and told him that she didn't mind his touch at all. But that didn't mean it was pleasant. The lady wanted to draw a line. The woman couldn't understand why she should feel guilty. She looked at Casius intently and said that it didn't matter to her whether he loved her or not. The lady had no intention of remaining by her husband's side. Sierra understood that it was certainly good to live in luxury without knowing one's place. In any case, it was foolish to think that one could become His Majesty's mistress. Sierra remembered her difficult life in poverty. The surroundings were dirty and completely uncomfortable. Her heart was squeezed by past memories. Casius took his beloved in his arms and headed home. The lady could already imagine how the newspaper columns would shout about the commoner returning home in the arms of a duke. This could not be. The Duke was embarrassed and asked the woman to wait for 20 minutes while he called the servants. The lady took a deep breath and exhaled and asked that as soon as they arrived at the estate, they should let her go. As they walked, Sierra looked at the Duke's shoulders, which seemed very broad to her. She could hear the Duke's heartbeat and felt herself freeze. The sculpted body, against which the woman leaned, made her heart beat faster too. Sierra, having gathered courage, asked the Duke why he thought that she had run away after becoming pregnant. The lady also could not understand where the husband had gotten such an idea from. The words that Heniel was not the Duke's daughter were no longer important. The more important question was why Cassius thought so. The man said that he had learned this as soon as the woman had left. Sierra wanted to know what had happened after she left for the village of Soup. The man confessed that when his beloved left, he went to a cafe she often visited. The events took place 5 years ago. Casius returned home from the war and asked if he had received any letters. The Duchess said that all the letters were in her husband's office. All this time in the war, Casius thought only about his beloved, and even sent her a letter. Although it was illogical, he asked her to wait for him. But a year later, Sierra said goodbye to him and disappeared. The house became empty, and Sierra's friends shrugged their shoulders. No one knew where the woman had gone. The cafe of memories, where the man had gone, clinging to hope, had not given him the answer to his question. The crushed man began to ask the cafe owner what she knew about Sierra. The lady said that her friend had gone somewhere and would not appear in that place again. The woman handed the Duke small booties for a very tiny girl and asked him to give them to her if he and the lady met. The owner of the cafe gave Kasia the baby booties that Sierra had left behind. The lady had actually bought them for her sister's daughter, Hanil, but from there, everything went wrong. Sierra never imagined that accidentally leaving a child's shoe in the cafe would have such consequences. It was because of this absurd situation that the Duke completely misunderstood everything. Duke Casius cried. He apologized because his words had brought back bad memories. The man knew he had no right to behave like that, but he assured his beloved that from that moment on, she would not be alone. When they reached the estate, the woman wanted to go alone. Killa was happy because the potion was ready. She wanted to tell His Majesty the Duke about it the next day. The woman asked Lana how things were going with the list of worthy doctors of the empire, but the list was not ready yet because there was absolutely no one on the list. It was hard to believe that there were no talented people anywhere. Mr. Hentel came to his colleagues. The women immediately asked if the man had seen the list of doctors. Both ladies were upset because they could not find a worthy candidate. When Mr. Hentel announced that he had found a candidate on the list, the ladies could not believe their ears. They were interested in absolutely every detail. The man just smiled and noted that it was an ordinary pharmacist. Finally, the paternity test kit was ready. First, Mr. Hentel wanted to talk about the potions. He used the herbs he had told me about beforehand, so they were safe. The doctor said that if you drink the potion, invisible waves will appear around your body. These waves will later be analyzed using a videosphere. Mr. Hentel asked the young people to drink the potion. Haniel began to be capricious because the potion turned out to be tasteless. Sierra noticed that Casius was looking at her with a strange expression. Hentel was about to look into the videosphere. Lady couldn't concentrate because Casius was staring at her the whole time. The man's gaze was stronger than the magic sphere. The recording was complete. Mr. Hentel was going to analyze the wavelengths and immediately report the results to the young people. Everything turned out to be much simpler than the lady had thought. Sierra thanked the gentleman for his work. The doctor was glad to serve such respected people. Casius was going to a meeting in the imperial palace, and he also offered to escort the lady to the main building. Haniel periodically showed hostility towards the Duke, and this time was no exception. The girl did not want Casius to accompany them anywhere. Sierra gently covered the child's mouth and asked him to stop talking nonsense. Sierra whispered in Haniel's ear that if she continued, they would have big problems. The woman thought that once the misunderstanding with Casius was resolved, he would have no reason to forgive them. Lady intended to have a serious talk with Haniel and tell her not to get attached to Casius, but also not to behave badly around him. Hentel approached Sierra. It occurred to the lady that there was some problem with the test. The doctor said that he had been invited to a pharmaceutical symposium, which was being held at that time by the Imperial Academy of Pharmacy.